Hi, Roy here on my channel Roy Reads Anything, including the Conan tales of Robert E. Howard, such as you find in this book here, which I've read many times before, but this time round reading them partly because this lovely book was a present from Dr. Jenny and I've been wanting to read it.
For it is I.
And partly because it is Cimmerian September, reading event devised by Michael K. Vaughan, where the idea is to read all of the stories by Robert E. Howard about his creation, Conan the Barbarian. So that's this lot, or you could also read these ones, for instance. So that's what I've been doing. I've actually been reading this book, but the story order I've taken from these. So the editors of the Del Rey set of books put the stories into the order they were written, whereas in this book they come in the order they were published in. So there's some differences. And I kind of thought the written order sounds pretty cool. But anyway, that's all a bit of a nicety really. So it's been fun. I mean, I think there's a risk to revisiting stuff one liked in decades past, because, you know, you can't go home again. For instance, we both really liked Tad Williams' fantasy novels in the 90s. Read them avidly. If you look at our copies, you can sort of see how we got progressively keener on them, because they start with a mass market paperback, and the second volume was a trade paperback, and then the final volumes were hardbacks, because you can't...
Gotta get it as soon as we can.
Yep.
Can't wait. Too exciting.
But trying to reread them now, just
Dull.
not so keen.
Very dull.
Just the way it is. But nothing like that has befallen Robert E. Howard and Conan, as far as I'm concerned. Really enjoyed reading these stories again and in this kind of intense way, all in one go. Stuff I like about them: they work well as adventures. You can see how Robert E. Howard learned his stuff from some great adventure writers from early in the century, such as Talbot Mundy. The horror elements, they can be genuinely creepy and horrific, and it's kind of cosmic horror, you know, it's sort of entities from beyond our reality or from the terrible gulfs of time that have somehow persisted into the imaginary era when the stories are set. So it's a really interesting fusion, works well, particularly in the best of the stories. For me personally, I like the fact that Conan, you know, he's a savage warrior. You would not want to kick your ball into his garden. You probably wouldn't want to be one of his followers. He's often like the last surviving member of an army, or you know, his pirate ships have been sunk or whatever. But he has a kind of baseline honour, almost like chivalry. In fact, he's arguably more honourable than a lot of the civilised people he encounters. So there's kind of he's not an anti-hero. So it's not grimdark, basically. So that, to me, it's, you know, that's kind of where I want my storytelling to be. Not Little Lord Fauntleroy exactly, but with some kind of, that would be a good crossover.
That would be great. I'd read that.
Some kind of basic decency there. And the variety of settings. So the stories are set in this imaginary time, which is our world, back in a sort of lost history after Atlantis. And the countries and territories are sort of all like the best possible setting for an adventure story, even though they couldn't really coexist in that way. So you might get a sort of frontier like forest, and you might get sort of you know, the oceans with like pirate type adventures happening on them, and sort of deserts and civilizations, and some of it's a bit like ancient Rome or a bit like medieval France. So all of that sort of mashed up for no reason other than it makes for a great story, and with a protagonist wandering through this world. Not in order, so the story starts when he's the king of the biggest nation in the Hyborian Age, but then they jump around in time. Whether you read them in publication order or the order the stories are written, which is great. So each story, you never know quite how it's going to begin. You're hurled into some situation, like one of my favourites, Zuthal of the Dusk. Conan and a female companion are in the desert, about to die of thirst, but he spots a city in the distance. Is it a mirage? No, it looks like it's a real city, and they head off towards that city, and adventures befall them. And then the next story, it's something completely different. So all of that variety and range is fun as well. So things that kind of jumped out at me or surprised me on this read through that would probably be different if I read them again. One of the stories only is novel length, The Hour of the Dragon. And that's again Conan, now a king. I was surprised how much I enjoyed that. It's probably the one I've reread the least because of its length. I remembered it as being a little bit of a sort of a tale where you get revisiting the sorts of things that Conan's already done. We've already seen him trapped in the dungeons of a palace. We've already seen... But that actually didn't seem to matter so much this time, and I quite like the little bit of extra space in the novel format. There was just a little bit more character development, a little bit more world building, and it felt a bit more like a fantasy novel. Could be a good place to start with Conan for people who would normally read fantasy chunks. So, Hour of the Dragon, enjoyed more than I expected. Also surprised by the extent to which The God in the Bowl short story. The God in the Bowl is like a detective story. In fact, it's like a particular kind of detective story. You could say it's an occult detective story, which segues nicely into Occult Detective October that's coming up next month. So yes, a surly young Conan who's broken into the house of a notable civic dignitary who's then been murdered. It's a great story. The other thing that surprised me a little bit is that it turns out we live in Cimmeria.
What?
So
all of us?
Just us personally. So,
okay.
As I said, the Hyborian Age it's our world in the past. So I've often thought, well, if we time travel, sitting right where we're sitting, if we time travelled back, where would we be? So according to Robert E. Howard's own maps, in one of them we would definitely be in Cimmeria, the northern country from which Conan himself comes with all his barbarianism. However, in another map, also drawn by Howard, we would be in the Pictish wilderness.
Hooray!
So Cimmeria, Pictish wilderness, perhaps it's disputed border territory.
Pictish wilderness.
Yeah, they're not those. The Picts are interesting though. They're kind of like Native Americans, or a sort of fusion of Native Americans and Celts.
Know enough as much about the Picts as was available at the time.
Yeah. I know he found them fascinating, and he wrote about Celtic type Picts in other stories. But
our Picts from up in Scotland.
Yeah.
We know about that we've seen carving of, and the Pictish beast.
Yeah, I'll put a Pictish beast on here. See if you can figure out what this creature is, the Pictish animal. Anyway, yes, so third surprise, we live in Cimmeria or not. I'm going to talk now about how the story ends. So, with spoilers, don't think there's really been spoilers. It's not much of a spoiler to say Conan is a barbarian. But spoilers ahoy for the rest of the video. Because if you read this as if it was one big novel, which, jumping around the timeline, fine. But how does it end? And that really depends what you choose to make the final story. So one way of reading it is that the Hour of the Dragon is the last story. That's when Conan's oldest. It would come, if you arrange them into a chronology, that would be the last one, written by Robert E. Howard. And the way that story ends, like a lot of books and stories, reader, I married him. It doesn't say reader, I married him. Conan's just defeated the main baddie on the battlefield, who's asking him what he wants as the ransom for his life. Conan says, there is a girl in your seraglio named Zenobia. Why, yes, so there is. Very well. The king smiled. So we've met this Zenobia. She helped Conan escape from a dungeon. Very well. The king smiled as at an exceedingly pleasant memory. Mm-hmm. She shall be your ransom and naught else. I will come to Belverus for her as I promised. She was a slave in the Media, but I will make her queen of Aquilonia. So that's the end of the Conan saga. He gets married, apparently. So I'd have to say he's a little bit more settled down in that novel, in that he's not just randomly robbing the world or moving on to the next adventure. He explicitly says he wants to hold on to what he's got. He's a kingdom of Aquilonia. He's not an empire builder, and now he's apparently going to get married. So you could say, well, that makes a nice, stable ending. Or you could take Red Nails, the final story that Howard wrote about Conan, and make that the end. So although it's chronologically a lot earlier, Conan's in the middle of his life. This is an adventure where he meets up with a strong female character, Valeria of the Red Brotherhood, a pirate like him, a warrior like him, and they have a great adventure in a lost city that contains a decadent civilization. Not the only such city that Conan's encountered, but they have had this great adventure, barely get away with their lives, and then romance ensues. It's a long way to the coast, she said presently, withdrawing her lips from his. What matter, he laughed. There's nothing we can't conquer. We'll have our feet on a ship's deck before the Stygians open their ports for the trading season, and then we'll show the world what plundering means. So that ending, it's going off to an unspecified adventure, and it's like it never ends. It's more like an unending myth, which I would rather prefer, personally. Either of those would be better than the pastiche ending, where it doesn't end with the end of Hour of the Dragon. You get another novel by Bjorn Nyberg, Conan the Avenger. You get 4 novellas stitched together by Lynn Carter, Elsbreg de Camp. You get another novel, Conan of the Isles. These aren't the best of pastiches, and to me it feels aesthetically, I'm a lot more tolerant of pastiches than some people, but to me I think the big calls, like major life events like having a son, etc., should only the originating author should get to do stuff like that, really. So I don't know, like I say, to me that's the least good option. There is a fourth way, which is the way of the comic book. So in Marvel Comics, there's a Conan the King comic. Well, there was in the 1980s. And there, he has a whole family, and they have a whole life in the royal palace, and it's a little bit soap opera-y. I actually like those.
Sounds great.
There are some really good stories.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Well, yeah, I think I can live with that more because comics are obviously a different thing, and I think the bar is lower, and that setting does throw up some good stories, and it's just easier to see. Clearly that's nothing like
to do with
this.
that.
Yeah, whereas when they're like
special?
official pastiches, they didn't.
Conan's Christmas.
They did not have a Christmas special.
Aww.
and they did not have a musical episode. But
That would have been great.
if it was remade now, obviously all of those things would happen.
Yeah.
So Conan's religion, obviously they're not Christian. There's Mitraic religion, which is kind of got some similarities to
Like
Christian.
Mithras?
Yeah,
Right,
like
right.
Mithras.
Yeah.
Whereas Conan's god Crom doesn't listen to you. He will not grant boons. All he does is give you the strength, breathe strength into your body when you start your life, and then off you go. Get on with it.
That seems a perfectly cromulent cosmology.
Well, yeah.
Theological thing. What you call it?
Okay, so yes, we won't detain ourselves too much with the theology of the Hyborian Age.
Okay.
But really enjoyed Cimmerian September, and so thanks to Michael K. Vaughan for devising a great event. Look forward to seeing other people's videos. Obviously you can dip into Conan without reading every single story. If I was to be asked what should I read if I was thinking am I possibly going to like this stuff, I would say The Tower of the Elephant. The story called Tower of the Elephant has pathos, it has adventure, it has the world building of this sort of world, it has the character of Conan emerging, and it has that kind of sense of wonder stroke horror, and it's just generally marvellous. I would say, to me, it's one of the best of short stories, really. I'd probably put it alongside The Swimmer, and some others, the Juniper Tree by Peter Straub, as just what I think are the best short stories of ever. Okay, I'm going to stop now. Back soon with something else. Bye.